Welcome to another continuing education module for Compass Christian Church Stephen Ministry. In today's module, what we're going to do is talk a little bit more about ourselves, the Stephen Ministry. So often in our continuing education sessions, we provide information so that we can be a little bit more expanded in our perspective, so that we can hopefully be not quite as surprised or shocked, or also may even have some mental health resources, or just reminders about using history and coaching and counseling as a resource potentially when our care receiver appears to have needs outside of what Stephen Ministry can provide. But it's really our attitude and our mental health towards life in general, and that really impacts our ability to be great Stephen ministers. And that's the reason we have supervision groups. The supervision groups are really meant to help us, get checked in on to see not only how is the relationship progressing, but also how we are doing with that. And caregivers actually go through quite a deal of stress. And a lot of times it's self-induced, but it's not unusual also for the relationship to be somewhat stressful in of itself because the person's going through a trial. And if we empathetically, connect with them and it, sticks with us between sessions, it can actually draw us down. And so we need to definitely keep it in perspective that their problems are their problems and our challenges and so forth are our problems. And neither the two shall necessarily need to be met because we can't solve their problems and they can't solve ours. And so it's really important that we keep a good boundary in that perspective. But more often than not, one of the areas where we struggle with is simply having a desire for the care receiver to be better, for them to get over it, if you will, to actually be progressing, if nothing else. And this is where we can really get into trouble because it's not our job to make them feel better. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but our job is to be available and to be present, to listen, and to walk alongside them while they work it out. And God provides whatever cure that may be needed beyond them just simply deciding they've had enough. So that business of us still carrying or adopting the mindset that we are making them feel better, that we are going to fix them, that we are going to help them progress, is really a dangerous line of thinking to entertain. And the reason for that is that we can end up easily very disappointed and discouraged. We can, milk a lot of concerns about the relationship. And finally, we can just feel hurt and afraid, and unfortunately, sometimes even angry. And this is especially poisonous to the relationship. So, if you are experiencing discomfort, number one, it's natural. It is entirely natural. That's the reason we go through 50 hours of training, because it takes quite a bit for us to get used to the idea of doing very little, because we're all naturally wanting to help other people. And believe me, just us being willing to show up and to primarily give them the mic and the floor to talk about what's going on with them is an incredibly great service that almost none of them get. Why? Well, a lot of times when they go through a trial, if they do in fact have a decent network of family and friends that they're comfortable with, they often isolate from them and have gotten to a point when they come and ask for assistance that they no longer feel like they have somebody who hears them and is willing to listen to them and let them continue to kind of work it out. So that's what we're there for. A previous Stephen minister in our church that I went through training with expressed a very unusual experience that I think exemplifies what Stephen ministers bring to the table. In her particular case, one of her young children had passed away, and it happened very suddenly, and she was at a church service soon thereafter. And the church had been incredibly supportive. As a matter of fact, she even mentioned how she oftentimes felt like she had to be encouraging to them because they were so distraught over her, very, very difficult, painful experience. But she talked about that, a lot of people said things to her that just weren't helpful. They'd say things like, he's better off, or that, now they're closer to God. It's just like, and really all she could think about is that she was separated from her child. Well, one of her friends, when she was standing in the atrium, this woman had this experience with her child's death, one of her friends came up and just stood alongside her, never said a word. Other people would come up to her, and oftentimes say things that just weren't helpful, that were painful, and weren't necessarily comforting. But her friend just stood with her for about 10 minutes. And then she finally went on to go to the service. And she said, that person's presence next to me, not saying anything, when there was nothing you could say that would help me feel comfort at that moment. Her presence alone brought me comfort. And it was the most significant response that she got through that entire ordeal. That says a lot. That says a lot. That means that every time we're opening our mouth, that we obviously are, entering into an area where it could be counterproductive. Not that we shouldn't be encouraging, not that we shouldn't use active listening, not that we shouldn't pray with them and offer that whenever they're willing to accept it. But giving them the floor is really the true purpose of Stephen Ministry, to allow them the forum, that safe environment to actually work out their trial. So when we get disappointed, one of the things that we could do is we could refer back to some of the literature that we have. And one of the great pieces of literature that we got that we didn't spend a whole heck of a lot of time on during our initial training, but we had it as one of our early assignments, was to read this book. And it is just an excellent, excellent piece of material that Dr. Kenneth Hawk put together. And one of the things in chapter 18, towards the end of the book, he talks about is celebrating results. But he said, our society, we really overemphasize results, and we actually get sucked into that, despite our training, to want it for our care receivers. And it says the emphasis on it is so common that it's probably worth proclaiming a rule that results start happening when we stop pushing for them. And it may just show up in our attitude, and we may actually be saying things. You really ought to consider doing this. You really ought to consider snapping out of it. No, that's not helpful. That provides pressure. That communicates judgment. And so we've got to learn how to focus on what we're doing as a process, as opposed to focusing on their results. And that's a really interesting thing that sometimes we have a hard time distinguishing. And so in chapter 18, Dr. Hawk actually gives us some examples. And he kind of illustrates the difference between a result goal and a process-oriented goal. And so I'll just read a couple for you just to give you an idea. The result goal would be that Jenny would no longer feel her loss as a raw wound, untouchable, and excruciatingly painful, focusing on the result. Whereas we ought to focus on the process. And here's an example of that in that same vein. Providing a comforting and accepting situation, helping Jenny to talk openly about her husband's death. What we're doing, providing a comforting and accepting situation, helping Jenny to talk more openly about her husband's death. So it's not about getting them to feel better. It's not about them to get them to say thank you. It's about providing an environment that they don't have currently, and that is a safe place to share, even to share things that are not pretty. So, if you're finding yourself disappointed in how they're progressing, one of the things that oftentimes we need to consider is, how am I doing in my expectations? Are my expectations focusing on what they're doing, or are my expectations appropriately focusing on what I'm doing and what I could be doing. I'll tell you this, I say this often, is that, I am way too comfortable talking, and I can chew up and eat up the actual time we have together by me talking and sharing stories and feedback. Not that those can't be productive at times and within limits, but we really ought to try to keep that to a minimum so that they have the opportunity to share. Now, of course, that sometimes is uncomfortable for our care receiver, and they in fact insist to have us open up a little bit. And there's no problem with doing that a little, but part of that response should be, we need to keep in mind that this time is for you. This is not about us becoming friends, although that may occur. It's about giving you time to air and discuss what's on your mind that you may not necessarily have the opportunity to do elsewhere. And, if you've got concerns about the relationship, about the progress that these people are going through, then what you ought to do is talk about it with your supervision group. Mention it. Mention it with fellow Stephen ministers, because it's a very unique service that we provide, this ministry. And so other people outside of Stephen ministry are not going to be that familiar with the idea of being that focused on providing a safe environment for other people to share. Most people in the world, in an effort to be helpful, try to fix, try to control, try to analyze, and that is just really not what we're there for. So, we can focus on maybe some short, brief responses that we should have, highly focused on, reflective listening, to try to encourage them to tell us more. That's very interesting. Tell me more. It sounds like you're frustrated. Can you tell me more about that? You see, just encouraging them to kind of continue to make use of the platform that we're providing them. In the most extreme situations, we, of course, can get very, very hurt. We're hurt that they won't call us back. We're hurt that they won't meet with us the way we like. We may get hurt that they're not progressing the way we like. We may just get tired and irritated that they just won't move on. And to be quite honest, that's very, very natural and human to have that, because we want things to improve. We wouldn't be here if we weren't interested in people getting better and having the opportunity to work with others. But this is a very specialized ministry that has a very laser-like focus on the care receiver having the opportunity to feel safe and be comfortable with talking it through, because they're not quite done yet. So if you in fact are hurt, afraid, anxious to a great extent, or angry about the way your care receiver is acting, or how they're progressing, or how they're not responsive, if it's intense, call your supervision leader. Reach out to one of us, and we'll be more than happy to walk you through what you're experiencing. At times when I'm a Stephen minister, I feel like I need to be a care receiver myself, because sometimes I just take on too much. I don't keep enough clear boundaries, and I consider myself the person that needs to fix them. And I'm really crummy at that. I do a very poor job of fixing other people, because I have absolutely no power to do so. And so what I'm doing when I put myself in that position, expectation-wise, I am setting myself up to feel bad. I'm setting myself up to be disappointed, to be hurt, and at times angry. And so, and I'll even point this out. If you're a person that's not much to express hurt and or anger very openly, then you might actually even begin to feel a little depressed. And you may start to actually even dread the sessions. And that would be unfortunate, because it's going to be very difficult to hide such a perspective. So I would highly encourage you to think about how you think and how you feel about your care receiver and your sessions. And and if you're struggling with it, then please be open about it. Please talk about it. Not about how your care receiver is doing and what they're not doing, but about you, about what we're doing and how we're progressing personally. And you know, my struggle, and I often say it almost like a broke record, is I'm talking too much. I'm talking too much in the sessions, and I'm frustrated a lot of times with that. And I don't mean that we're not going to be frustrated or disappointed at times, because that's very natural. But if it becomes a prominent way we think and feel, and it becomes the major part of what we experience when we think about our ministry, then we obviously need to take action. And the answer is not to leave Stephen Ministry most of the time. Most of the time is to talk about it. Most of the time is to open up about how we are falling short. And it's very natural to fall short of the glory of God. Paul talks about that a great deal and how he did as well. And I'd put him on a plateau much higher than almost any of us. And so this is not unusual, but it is something that we constantly have to be vigilant to take care of ourselves. So as a Stephen minister, I encourage you to use supervision. Even if you do not have a care receiver at this time, I encourage you to go, because why? You could be one of those people who can see the forest for the trees to respond to people like me that come in and are frustrated and are hurt and discouraged. So I just want to tell you that, this is just a fabulous ministry. And when it's done well and we actually work the process as it's designed, it is very, very gratifying. If you're not feeling that now, that's okay. That it happens to all of us. But one thing that I know I always can do is I can make a gratitude list about the things I am grateful for about the ministry, and also just simply to pray and to tell God how I'm struggling with it. But ultimately, you should also talk to someone else in the ministry as well. Use your supervision group. Use your supervision leaders, and don't let it eat away at you, and don't let it be a secret. Because there's an old common saying in recovery circles, you're only as sick as your secrets. And it's because when something's left just in our own mind, we're the only perspective we have. And a lot of times perspectives remaining in our own heads become very skewed. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your commitment to Stephen Ministry. I know your care receivers are incredibly blessed by it, and I am too, just to be a part of you. Thank you.